want to talk about minimizing to fit into a tiny house. Originally, when I designed my tiny house, I had a really good idea about what I had for space. So for me, minimizing to fit in the tiny house, it was pretty exact because I knew how big everything was so that I knew how much I could keep in order to fit into my tiny house. I did have a lot of stuff. I think I had talked about this in other videos, but I originally went down from a huge 4-bedroom house and fit into a tiny house. So if I can do that, you can do it too. I guess you could always work the other way around and minimize first and then move into a tiny house after you've minimized. And before you knew what you had for space, I would say even the smallest tiny houses have enough room to have some hanging things, at least some hanging things for clothing, and some space to have your underwear and your socks and whatever other things that you need. Those tiny houses generally have no space. I have a lot of storage in my tiny house. So I'm kind of going to talk about how to fit into something about my size, but I'm going to expand on that so that it would kind of work for whatever tiny house you fit into. I'm going to go through everything that I can think of for minimizing into a tiny house. There's a lot of mental things when you're minimizing for a tiny house. I really thought that it was the hardest thing to do. I think living in a tiny house is easier than minimizing to fit in the tiny house because you have all these things that you're hanging on to. You're probably collecting something if you have a collection of something. Really, you don't have a whole lot of space in a tiny house for collections at all. If it's a really tiny collection, like I have chopsticks that I collect, I kept most of my collection of chopsticks, but I think if you have something that's a lot bigger, you're not going to be collecting cellos in a tiny house. I have 4 ukuleles, and that is plenty. I have way too many ukuleles, really, for a tiny house. You only need one, let's be honest. But I love ukuleles, and I feel like I'm starting to collect them in a way. After some time in a tiny house, you kind of have to purge because you collect so much stuff that you're like, why do I have this? I haven't looked at it in a while. Or it's easy to keep getting things once you move into the tiny house. Like I have a lot of art supplies that I'm not using right now that I feel like I should get rid of, but then part of me doesn't want to get rid of it because I feel like, well, what if I need it again? So that's kind of a toss-up. If you feel like you're ever going to use something again, then you don't want to get rid of it. In a tiny house, you really don't have extra space for anything. Sometimes I have friends that have brought things over to my house. I don't have any extra space for guests. I don't have room for gifts. If someone's going to give me a gift, they better know me really well because they've got to get me something that they know that I can use and that because most of the stuff I can't have. I can't have extra of anything. My bookshelves are cram-packed full of things. I've said this on other videos. I've gotten rid of 15 boxes of books. It's really mentally difficult to minimize for a tiny house, and I totally understand that. But if you really want to fit into a tiny house, you have to do it. How can I minimize things digitally? Like, how can I take and turn something into a digital memory so that it takes up, just space on a disk or something, or a drive or something? So you're thinking about photos, and I've actually scanned photos that I thought that maybe I would want to remember, but I didn't want to have the actual photo anymore. So I tried to just minimize it by putting it on a file. Also, the other thing that I did is I had series of books that I had read and that I probably was never going to read again. And I had read all of Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. So then I thought, well, I've got to be able to minimize this. How am I going to do it? So I got rid of all those, but I basically got a Kindle so that now, or, an iPad or something, so that you can read all of your stuff digitally so that you're not collecting books. I only will buy a book if I feel like it's a reference item, or if I feel like I'll look at it for a while and then just give it away, because I really can't have any more books. And even now, I feel like I have way too many books on my bookshelf. I really have crammed it in there. And I feel like I have to go through them and minimize them, because there's a lot of books that I just haven't looked at in a really long time, and I don't need them anymore. So I feel like I got to do that. And when I've done that, I've given them, the last time I did that huge purge where I purged all the books, I actually brought them to a library, and they sell them to make money to buy book, like library types of books. When you're planning for books, think about it in terms of linear inches. So I actually have 8 feet of book space, or you can think about it in terms of feet, like how many feet, linear feet, do you have for book storage. So I have 8 feet of linear space for books. That's kind of a lot, actually. For a tiny house, that's huge. I think when you're planning for books, don't get rid of absolutely everything, because if you can fit them in that kind of space, then you're gonna be able to keep the things that are most important to you. So, and then anything that you feel like you can read digitally, do it. I mean, really think about it. You don't really need books on, series, like any kind of, like, I mean, I gave up my Anne Rice series and a bunch of other series that I had read. Like, you don't have to hang on to that stuff unless it's like the signed edition or something. Then hang on to it. Think about the things that are most important to you. And think about why you're keeping the books. If you haven't looked at that book in forever and you're never going to read it again, you should just get rid of it, because you're not going to ever look at it again. I mean, even in my 8-foot storage space, I have tons of books that I still haven't looked at in a really long time. And I really need to go through that and get rid of them. Even after you've lived in the tiny house, once you've minimized to get in the tiny house, you're never done. You're going to always have to kind of purge things out, bring new things in that you like, and purge things out. But you kind of have to replace one for the other. You can't go, well, I can just keep getting books. No, you have to, like, get rid of this book if you're going to put this book in its spot, if you really have limited storage. The next thing I want to talk about are clothes, and a clothes closet. I have a ton of clothes storage. I have 36 inches wide of a closet, and that is huge for our tiny house. I probably have the biggest closet of any tiny houser around. My house is not that big. I'm a good designer. So I can design it so that I can fit a lot of things in my tiny house. So I have a ton of storage in my tiny house. And my tiny house is only really 17'6" long. My trailer bed is 20 feet, but my tiny house isn't quite that long. So I really have fit a lot in here, and I am comfortable. And I think I have to say, because I have planned a lot of storage in my tiny house, I think I live more comfortably than most tiny housers, because I do have so much storage. It's more doable, I think. I am not really a minimalist. I have to kind of minimalize to fit in my tiny house, but I feel like I really have a lot of stuff for a tiny houser. And maybe it's because I have a lot of storage, but most tiny housers don't have this much clothing storage, or this much storage in general at all. In my tiny house, I have the 36 inches of clothing space, and on the top I have a shelf that goes the entire depth of the storage of the closet, and that's 24 inches deep. All closets are 24 inches deep by however wide, and that is because the hanger if you have hanging storage, it has to have that depth in order to fit a hanger into it in the middle, so that you can hang your clothes. Underneath my hanging clothes, I have a footlocker, and in my footlocker I have underwear and socks and bras and whatever. Sometimes I keep nightwear down there too. I've seen some tiny housers that literally have like this much storage space, and they have a couple pair of pants and a couple shirts, and that's it. I don't even know how they do it. I I mean, you can do it. You can definitely do it. But I think it's really living very leanly. I don't want to live that lean. I mean, I live leanly as it is just because I live in a tiny house, but I feel like I have pretty normal life. I don't feel like I'm trying to, oh, I can only have two pairs of pants. No, my God, I have so much more. My closet is pretty crammed, but I also take and have winter clothing and I have summer clothing. So I take my winter clothing out at the end of the season and put it in a storage space outside. I don't need temperature control for clothing. So I put that outside and then I bring my summer clothes inside, put them in my closet. And it's kind of, I like doing that actually because I feel like it's kind of like I'm opening like a present. Like every spring, I get to take out my summer clothes and I get to wear my summer clothes. And that is really kind of cool. I feel like I'm opening a present. And then when comes fall, I switch them out and I feel like I'm getting a present in the fall. And I get to wear the clothes that I, wear in the fall. So that's kind of an interesting thing about swapping your clothes out. And plus, you can have a lot more. You can have double the amount of clothes. And I already have 36 inches of closet space, but then that means I have 6 feet of closet space because I trade my clothes out. So that's pretty cool. If you're really minimizing to fit into a tiny house, then you have to think in terms of if you know how much storage you're going to have for hanging clothes, you have to kind of think about it like how many shirts can I get away with, how many pants can I get away with, and everything's got to match everything else. So maybe you would have 4 pair of pants and 4 shirts, that kind of thing. And if you're a woman, you'd have a dress or a couple dresses or something, or skirts or something. But maybe that's all that you can fit in your tiny house. Some people like to live like that. Some people really enjoy trying to minimize. It's like kind of like a mental game to them. And I'm just not that way. I'm more of trying to just live comfortably and practically. I don't have a ton of clothes, but I do have more than most tiny housers, and I think it makes for comfortable living. In order for you to figure out how much you can take with you to fit in the tiny house for drawer space, you kind of have to mock it up. You kind of have to maybe take a drawer that you have at home and go, okay, how much is this space? How wide is it? How deep is it? And how high is it? If you've mocked up the drawer and know how much you need for storage, then you know how much you're going to need in order to fit into the tiny house. So in my kitchen, I have shelves above my counter space for dishes. And really, when you're planning for dishes, think about how much you really need in terms of dishes. I know some of you have dishes from weddings or, previous marriages where you have collected a huge set of dishes. I did. I had a setting of 8 for parties and such. So I ended up giving away a lot of my stuff on eBay selling my stuff on eBay, what I could sell anyway. And anything that I couldn't sell on eBay or through Craigslist, I ended up just giving away. I know some people who have minimized to the point of having 1 fork and 1 knife and 1 spoon and 1 plate, but I have not done that at all. I could have 4 people for dinner at my tiny house, and I've actually done that before. It's possible that you can have enough, if you have enough storage in your tiny house, you can do that. That's kind of hard to plan for in terms of how much space do you need, because I have like a lot of glasses, but think about really when you're minimizing for your tiny house, what you really need, like 4 mugs. I really try not to get over 4 mugs. It's tempting because I'll see a mug out and I'll be like, oh, that's such a cool mug, but do I really want to get rid of anything else I have at home? And the answer is usually no. I think of it like that. I don't really want to have to trade anything out, so I just don't get more mugs. I have wine glasses and I have regular glasses, and I really sort of have minimized those, but I feel like I keep gaining more glasses. I really only have 2 glasses that is for regular water. And I have a bunch of like little jelly jars that have kind of multiplied, and I kind of have to get those out of my house. And I end up doing that. I end up taking some extra kitchen stuff and I put it in the garage in like a bin, like if I have too many jelly jars um, wandering, kind of circulating around my house. I try to minimize it that way. I have I tried to minimize my silverware, so I have like 4 teaspoons and 4 soup spoons. I actually have more than 4 soup spoons. I think I have more like 6 soup spoons. 4 forks, 4 knives. I probably have more knives than that though. And then I have other things, but I have a silverware drawer. I could really have as much as anybody else in any other house, really. And I have a junk drawer, and it's got all kinds of stuff in it. You can see it in the picture. And I have a drawer that I keep all of my hand towels in for the kitchen, and also napkins, cloth napkins I have in there. Probably one of the only people that have cloth napkins in a tiny house, but I think that it's good because I'm not wasting. I guess when you use cloth napkins, it's less wasteful. I should use them more, to be honest. I have a drawer with extra kitchen utensils like blender stuff and my measuring cups, that kind of thing. Below that, I have food storage. I don't have a lot of food storage. I would say my food storage is like one cabinet, or I have 3 cabinets for food storage, not including the little refrigerator. But I have 18 inches by 18 inches, 18 inches by 18 inches. I have a cabinet that is to the right of my kitchen sink cabinet that has food storage like rice and oatmeal in it, and lentils, and that kind of food storage stuff. I also keep some food things on the counter, and I have all of my vinegar in one area, pretty much. Not all of it, but that's like balsamic vinegar in one side. And then behind the stove, I keep the cooking oils, and I have some other vinegar. You can see that in the picture. On my countertop, I keep fruit, and sometimes I'll keep bread, and I try not to let it get too cluttered, but the picture that you're seeing now is actually not cluttered for me. Sometimes I'll just throw everything in there, and I think that's the problem with tiny houses is you tend to like pack things away into like little crevices because you're like, well, where do I put this? I don't know. And so you just cram it someplace. I do that a lot with this corner on my countertop, and so it's actually kind of neat for this photo. This is my pots and pans storage underneath my stove. And I actually made this drawer to hold my pots and pans so that I have enough storage to keep quite a lot of pots and pans, as you can see, even a large pot for stews. Above the range, I have storage for spices and teas of all kinds. And so I think it's good to have space like this to hold this kind of stuff. Or it could always be used as regular food storage. I have storage underneath my sofa that is huge, and it is 5'5", I think, in length, and it is 24 inches deep, and it has a ton of storage for things. I've actually listed it on labels on the underside of the lids to the storage space. Basically, I keep photographs on one side, and then on the left side I keep extra blankets. Like I actually switch out my blankets. I have a winter blanket that I have on the bed, and then in the summer I have a light silk bedspread that I put to replace the heavier blanket in the winter. It's much lighter, and so I switch out the blankets. I guess I decided that I didn't want to be too minimal. I wanted to kind of live luxuriously in a tiny house, and I think I've planned my storage around that idea. I have a storage bin for sheets, and that is under the right side of my dining room seat. And it's kind of a lot for a tiny house. I mean, I have 3 sheet sets at least, and I have a sheet set for the boat in there. Like, I have a lot. And then on the left side, which is really the same thing, I have storage for sweaters. I have some other storage areas that a lot of tiny housers don't have, and one of them is that I have a coat closet. And I was originally planning that for my ex-partner so he would keep all his clothes in there. But since we are not living together anymore, I use that for coat storage. And that's 36 inches wide. It's a lot of storage for coats. On the bottom, I have some tools, and I keep some like boots in there, like mud boots. And on the top, I have like a picnic basket and like a travel bag and some craft things. Also, something that's kind of cool for a tiny houser is that I have storage for cookbooks. And I don't think a whole lot of tiny housers have storage for cookbooks. And I do. And I have, like this much. It's pretty nice to have storage for cookbooks. I think when you're planning to fit into a tiny house, you have to kind of, if possible, know what you got to work with in terms of how much you're going to have to squeeze down, how much you're going to have to get rid of in order to fit into it. And it's not like a formula, like all tiny houses have the same thing. So you're going to have to work on how big your tiny house is and what you have room for, and really think about when you're planning a tiny house, or you've got a tiny house that you're getting from a kit, or you're buying a plan or having someone build a tiny house for you, and you're planning your storage, or the storage is already set, you need to know how much that is so that when you're minimizing to fit in the tiny house, you can do it adequately, so that when it's time to fit into it, you can fit everything in there without too much hassle. So I think that's it. Let me know how I might be able to help you, and if you have any questions on trying to fit and minimize for your tiny house.